All right, class. So we are going to talk about typecast. And typecast is the blueprint that we're going to use for analyzing poetry. And so this is essentially the equivalent of when we're reading a book, we're reading and we do chapter by chapter, we would do an attack the text. So typecast is the poetry version of that. So take a moment. I know when some of you heard attack the text, you may have been tempted to flip your desk over or throw your computer up against the wall. So go ahead and pick those things up and trust me in the fact that typecast is really going to help you in analyzing the poem. All right, so are you ready to go? Let's go. All right. So we're going to start with a pre-read, just like we do with an attack the text. Before we read the poem, we need to first look at the first T in typecast, okay? And there are 3 T's in typecast, so it's important to make sure that you're on top of this and following the process. The first T is for the title. So you're going to look at the title and maybe the author, but really focus on the title alone. Don't look at the rest of the poem. Before you've read the poem, we are going to figure out what it seems to mean. Now we're going to start by looking at the denotation, so the dictionary definition of the words in the title, and that's going to give us some insight. But we also need to consider the title's connotation before we read. Now remember, connotation is the feelings that are evoked by the words in the title. So how do those words make us feel? What do they make us think about? What are the connections that we make when we see those words? All right. So really think through what could the title possibly mean? And then we're going to kind of list all of our ideas. We're going to just kind of brainstorm what this poem could possibly be about based on the title. Now, keep in mind, in many cases, poems are not titled. Shakespeare didn't title his sonnets. He just numbered them. So that's really not going to help you a lot in some cases. But many of the poems that we read will have a title, and so we need to look through those. Next, we're going to move to during our read. So we're going to read through the poem, but as we read, we need to kind of follow a process there. Okay. So during our reading, we are going to look at the P here. And the P stands for paraphrase. So as we read the poem, we're going to paraphrase what it means. Now, some people like to read through the whole poem one time without. I'm one of those people. So I just read through the poem and just kind of take it in. And then I go back and read through it again and paraphrase, especially for these shorter poems. And in most cases, that's what we're going to be working with. I do recommend doing that. But so maybe read through it one time and then go back and read through it piece by piece and paraphrase as you go. So while you're reading, you're going to translate the lines or words into other more easily understandable words. And so consider this your literal read. Okay. And this is like surface level only. So what does it say is going on? What does it say is happening? Okay. Look to those natural breaking points like punctuation for those complete thoughts. Okay. So don't just stop at the line breaks. Look at the end punctuation, commas, that sort of thing. All right. And then make notes on the actual poem itself in the margins as you go. Now, in the past, we've done this where you're actually writing on the paper, but it gets a little cumbersome that way. So I'm actually looking forward to working with this digitally because we're going to have a kind of template set up that's going to give you space for all of those things, making sure that you are, easily organizing and structuring this. Okay, so just go through and paraphrase from beginning to end, and then read through the paraphrase. Does the paraphrase say the same things that the other poem said? Not the deeper meaning, just that surface level. Then we're going to take a closer look. So after you've read it that first time, maybe that second time for the paraphrase, now we're going to go and we're going to start looking at the C here. And the C is for the connotation. Okay, we are going to extend our, so after we've read it the first time, we're going to extend our literal read to the figurative level. So the last time it was, what did it say? Now, what is the deeper meaning? what is the subtext, right? We're digging deeply and we're asking the question, why is this? Why is this the word that the author chose here? Why did the author make this comparison, this simile or this metaphor, this example of personification? Why did the author choose these things? Remember, figurative is what they said, literal is what they said, and figurative is what was the meaning behind it. Think of it this way. Let's say that I say to my wife one evening, hey, honey, I know that it's our anniversary, but the guys invited me to a soccer game tonight, so I was thinking I was just going to head out with them. Is that okay with you? And her response is fine. So she said it was fine, so I'm all good, if I'm looking at the literal meaning. But we all know that there is subtext there. There is something else there. There's something deeper, a deeper meaning. And that deeper meaning is that fine is not fine, right? So keep that connotation in mind. What is beneath the surface? What else is being said? Okay. So we're going to look at some of these literary terms here. And these are the literary terms, the devices and the elements that we're going to want to focus on when we're looking at the connotation. We're going to look at similes and metaphors, what's being compared and why. We're going to look at personification. Again, what's being compared and why. Personification is just another example of a simile or a metaphor, except one of the things that is being compared is a human being, a person, right? Is there synecdoche? Are they using a part of an item to describe the whole, right? Remember, boots on the ground, right? The suits are coming, that sort of thing. So what's the purpose of the author not referring to the whole being, but just a part? Okay. Are there allusions? Are there references to historical events? Are there references to literary ideas, right? Concepts, books, plays, movies, that sort of thing. And then why is it important that they're referencing these things outside of the poem? Okay. Did the author use any sound devices to kind of catch your ear or get you into a pattern, right? We see, we've discussed these sound devices like alliteration, assonance, consonance, onomatopoeia, rhythm, and rhyme. What's the impact of those devices? And then we're going to look at some of those literary elements that we've been seeing and discussing all year long, right? How does point of view impact the meaning? Is it told in first person? How does that impact the meaning? Is it told in third person? How does that impact it? And guys, this is the time. Okay, this is the time where we don't see it anywhere else, really. Occasionally in other types of works, but in poetry is where we often see second person. How does second person impact the meaning? Okay, remember, second person is the author speaking directly to the reader. Diction. Does anything stand out? Does the author typically write in very simplistic words and then all of a sudden, bam, there's this really complex word, or vice versa? Does the author use a dialect? Do they use slang? Okay. Does anything stand out? Why does it stand out? What could it mean? Symbolism. What is the literal and figurative meaning? And why does the author use it? Does the author write about a dove? Okay, literally a dove is just a bird. It's like a step up above a pigeon, right? But figuratively, it could mean love. It could mean peace. There are a lot of times a dove is used as a symbol, right? Why does the author choose to use it? 5 sense imagery. Look at the senses used and the mood they create. 5 sense imagery is huge. We've worked with this before. This is how the author brings you in, right? They make you feel like you're a part of it. They give you those sights and smells and sounds and tastes and touch, right? So how does the author use those? All right. So these are the things we need to look at when we're looking at the connotation of the poem. And then as we wrap up the connotation and we're putting all of our notes along the poem, kind of pointing out those items, we then move to the A in typecast. And that is the attitude of the poem. Okay. Consider the speaker and the poet's attitude, their tone, okay? Because sometimes the speaker is different from the poet. The poet takes on a character for the poem, okay? Sometimes, right? Sometimes the poet is the poet is the main character, the poet is the speaker, but sometimes the poet is not. And we're going to see a good example of one of those, a couple of them actually. All right. So what's their tone? What's their tone towards themselves? What's their tone towards the other characters? And what's their tone towards the subject of the poem? We have a great poem that we're going to read where the author and the character are two different people, the author and the speaker. And the author really thinks the speaker is a fool. All right. The speaker thinks he is super smart. He's figured it all out. But the author knows that he hasn't. Okay. So how do they feel about that? How do they feel about the subject of the poem? Now, we can talk about tone in a lot of different ways. Okay. There are a lot of different words that we can use for this. And I'm going to post a list of tone words for you, a short list of them in Canvas. But briefly, I'm just going to show you that list here so that you can get an idea of the type of words that we use for describing tone. All right. So these are some tone words, and clearly there are quite a few, and this is just a short list in comparison to the words that you could use to describe tone. All right, next we're going to shift gears, and we are going to look at the S in typecast. So we've looked at the T and the P, we've looked at the C, the A, the attitude, right? And now we're going to look at the S, and the S is for shifts. Okay. And this is where we're going to mark shifts in the speaker's attitude. So how does that attitude change? Do they go from really happy to kind of dark, right? Or look for other ways that the poem may have shifted. And so we're going to look at changes in setting, keywords. So maybe they repeat a word for a while and then that changes. Punctuation. Maybe there are punctuation changes. Changes in stanza and line breaks or lengths. Or maybe there are some ironic statements. Now, keep in mind that some poems don't have any shifts. Okay, some do, some don't. There's no real hard and fast rule for this. So if there are no shifts, make a note of that because there are no shifts for a reason. All right. Ask yourself why. Why did those shifts happen? Or if they don't have shifts, ask why. Okay, now we're going to move on to the second T in typecast. And the second T in typecast stands for title. Okay, so we have the title again. Now that we've read and analyzed the body of the poem, we're going to look at the title again, and we are going to see, go back and examine the title again, keeping all of the interpretation that we've noticed in mind, and then what does the title really mean? Maybe you were right. Maybe not. Maybe it's something completely different from what you expected. Was that done on purpose? Did the author want you to think one thing when you first started the poem and then think something different later? Explain that. All right. And finally, we're going to wrap up with the last T in typecast. Now, hopefully this is no surprise to you because in all of literature, there is one literary element that is the most important, the one that stands out above all others, and that is the theme. What's your point? What's the point of the poem? Okay. What is the poet really saying? List the overall themes. There might be a bunch of them, right? Then for each theme, determine the apparent purpose for discussing it and what the lesson to learn is. Okay. Write out these two aspects of theme into one sentence. Okay. Why did the author write it? And what is the lesson to learn? And like I said, there may be multiple themes within a poem. Just like any other literature, the author might be telling us more than one message. Okay? So be ready for that. All right. And we're going to be dealing with some pretty short poems, and you may be surprised at how much an author can pack into those. And that'll do it. That's our typecast notes. Have fun analyzing poetry.